The afternoon sun bathed the streets of Beverly Hills in golden hues as Richard Cole, a dashing 33-year-old self-made millionaire with a tailored royal blue suit and piercing blue eyes, stepped out of his luxury car, his mind tangled in invisible threads of emptiness no money could untie. He adjusted his designer shades, nodding faintly at the car wash attendant, before turning toward his phone, swiping through meaningless notifications, searching for something, anything that would make him feel again. A line of upscale vehicles gleamed in the lot, but none stood out like his black Aston Martin, polished like a mirror, reflecting everything except the hollowness in his heart. Richard had it all: mansions overlooking the coast, a yacht in Monte Carlo, boardrooms that bowed when he entered. But none of it soothed the aching silence inside him. He hadn't picked up his guitar in over 10 years, not since the day his younger brother died and took Richard's song with him. Instead, he built empires of silence, towers of wealth built over pain too heavy to name. As he walked into the shaded lounge of the waiting area, sipping espresso from a crystal cup, he barely noticed the little girl with the ragged clothes and sun-kissed hair step out from behind the detailing bay, holding a bucket and sponge, humming softly to herself as she stared in awe at the glossy machine she was about to clean. Her name was Emily, 12 years old, with big, hopeful eyes the color of a summer sky, tangled honey-blonde hair pulled into a messy braid, and a voice that could make angels weep. But today, she was just a poor kid, cleaning cars to help her sick mother pay rent. She dipped the sponge into water and moved slowly, carefully, as if every streak mattered, quietly, humming to herself. Not for performance, not for pity, but because singing helped her forget she hadn't eaten breakfast. Richard glanced briefly through the glass at the tiny figure scrubbing his fender, his brows slightly furrowed, puzzled. Was she singing? He looked again, annoyed at first by the sound interrupting his thoughts, but then something strange happened. He stopped scrolling, sat back, and listened. Emily's voice drifted through the air like wind through broken windows, raw, angelic, and utterly unfiltered. She sang a song from memory, one her mother used to sing before hospital bills replaced lullabies, and as her voice filled the silence, Richard's hands trembled just slightly over his phone. He didn't understand why, but the sound of her voice struck something deep and ancient in him, like a memory buried under years of board meetings and empty champagne toasts. She hit a note so tender, so vulnerable, that his throat tightened with unfamiliar pressure, his eyes blinking faster than usual. The song wasn't fancy, just a cover of a classic ballad about loss and hope, but it was sung with a purity Richard hadn't felt since he was a teenager, playing guitar in his garage with dreams instead of deadlines. Something about the way her voice cracked on the last line, it wasn't imperfection, it was soul, ripped right through the wall he'd built around his heart. Emily had no idea anyone was listening, no clue her quiet song had reached the ears of a man who hadn't cried in over 15 years. Richard's gaze followed her every motion now, not with the cold curiosity of a billionaire watching a worker, but with the silent wonder of a man realizing he'd forgotten what beauty sounded like. As she rinsed the soap off the tire, she started into the second verse, eyes closed, her voice trembling slightly from the ache in her stomach, but still she sang like the stars might fall if she stopped. Richard leaned forward, elbows on knees, heart thudding like a war drum, memories flashing of his brother, strumming that very song on their old porch, the scent of pine trees in summer, the way they used to laugh before the accident stole the music forever. And now a little girl with holes in her shoes was resurrecting it. The silence in his chest cracked like thin glass as the final note left Emily's lips, and in that exact second something inside Richard broke loose, not like a dam, but like a soft unraveling. He felt the sting of tears rise uninvited, and for once he didn't fight them. They rolled down his face in quiet rebellion, and he didn't even bother to wipe them. The workers around him remained oblivious, unaware of the tiny miracle unfolding just beyond the glass window. As Richard stood slowly and stepped outside, drawn to the sound like a man hearing his own heartbeat for the first time in years. Emily looked up suddenly, startled, her face flushed with embarrassment, thinking she'd done something wrong, but he smiled, voice cracked like old vinyl. "What's your name?" She blinked in confusion, unsure if she was in trouble. "Emily," she whispered, clutching her sponge tightly. Richard nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "You have a voice that can heal broken things." And just like that, the world shifted for both of them. One was reminded of what it means to feel, and the other discovered that even a whisper of music can echo inside the heart of a stranger forever. Emily stood frozen for a moment, sponge dripping water onto the pavement, as the strange weight of Richard's words settled over her like warm sunlight after a storm. No one had ever said anything like that to her before, not her teachers, not the neighbors, not even her sick mother who always said, "Baby, don't waste your breath on dreams we can't afford." But here he was, this rich, important man with glossy shoes and eyes that looked like they belonged to someone who hadn't slept in years, telling her that her voice could heal things. She stared at him, unsure whether to speak or run away, until he reached into his pocket and handed her a soft white handkerchief with the initials RC stitched into the corner, gently wiping the soap suds from her small hand and saying softly, "You reminded me of someone I used to be." Emily didn't know what to say, but her gut told her that whatever was happening here, this quiet exchange between a forgotten girl and a broken man, was something rare, something fragile, like a snowflake landing on hot pavement. Richard knelt to her level, ignoring the stares of passing workers, and asked, "Do you sing like that every day?" She nodded shyly, brushing a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "Only when no one's listening," she said. He smiled sadly, the kind of smile people wear when they remember something they wish they hadn't buried. That's when it matters most. Just then, the shop manager called for Emily to start on the next vehicle, but Richard raised a hand and gently asked if he could speak to her for 5 more minutes. The manager hesitated, confused by this surreal scene, then shrugged and walked away, muttering something about rich folks being unpredictable. Richard took a deep breath, sitting down on a nearby bench, motioning for her to join him. "Tell me your story," he said, "and I'll tell you mine." Emily sat with her knees pulled up, glancing sideways at this man who seemed both larger than life and utterly lost at the same time. "My mum used to be a singer," she whispered, "before she got sick. We used to sing together just for fun. Then she got laid off and everything changed. She doesn't leave the apartment anymore. Can't even walk to the kitchen some days." Richard's heart clenched, the pain in her voice cutting through him like an old song with lyrics he couldn't forget. "So I clean cars after school," she continued, "save every dollar in a cookie tin. I want to record a song, just one." For her, Richard swallowed hard, the lump in his throat returning. "You want to make a record?" he asked. She nodded quickly, eyes wide with hope. "Just a demo. I don't even care if anyone hears it, as long as she does." And that was it. That tiny sentence pierced something inside him he thought had long since died. He stared at her, seeing not just a girl, but a flicker of the innocence he'd lost, chasing numbers and titles. "My brother used to say that music was the only truth left in the world," Richard murmured, his voice brittle. "He was the real musician in our family. I just followed the money." Emily didn't know what to say, but she reached into her back pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of notebook paper with lyrics scribbled in blue ink, a melody written in her heart but never heard by ears other than her own. She handed it to him. "This is the song I wrote for her," she said. Richard took the page delicately as if it were made of glass and read the words slowly, each line dripping with raw honesty. About holding on through pain, about dreaming in the dark, about loving someone even when they're fading. It wasn't polished, it wasn't professional, but it was real. "These words," he said softly, "are what people pay millions for and never find." He stood, suddenly filled with purpose. "Emily," he said, "I want to help you record this." She stared at him in disbelief, eyes wide as if he'd just handed her the moon. "I don't want charity," she said quickly, defensively. "This isn't charity," he replied. "It's redemption." He didn't elaborate, but Emily saw something flicker behind his eyes, regret, maybe, or longing. He handed her a business card, sleek and cold, with only his name, number, and the words "True Sound Studios" in gold at the bottom. "Come by tomorrow," he said. "After school, I'll have the studio waiting." Emily stared at the card like it was a golden ticket, still unsure if this was a dream. "What if I mess up?" she whispered. Richard looked her square in the eyes. "Then you mess up beautifully," he said, "and the world will be better for it." With that, he turned, walking toward his car, but before getting in, he looked back and added, "By the way, I cried today, and I don't cry." Emily smiled, holding the card tightly against her chest as if afraid it might vanish, and for the first time in months, she ran, not from something, but toward something, toward hope, toward music, toward a stranger who, like her, had forgotten what it meant to be seen and had just begun to remember. The next afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the city skyline, Emily clutched Richard's business card like it was made of light, her heart racing with a strange mix of hope and terror, her backpack slung across her small shoulders filled not with school books, but her precious lyric sheet, a hairbrush, and a pair of old headphones she never dared plug into anything anymore because they reminded her of nights when her mother still danced in the kitchen. She walked through neighborhoods she'd never seen before, streets lined with palm trees and mansions behind iron gates, until she reached the address printed in golden letters on the card, True Sound Studios. The glass doors shimmered like magic, and as she stepped inside, the world seemed to hush around her. Clean white walls, framed platinum records, a grand piano glowing under warm lights, and the subtle scent of wood polish and fresh coffee lingering in the air. She didn't belong here, she thought, but before doubt could devour her, a receptionist greeted her warmly and said, "You must be Emily. Mr. Cole's been expecting you." Her eyes widened as she followed the woman down a hallway, every step echoing like a heartbeat, until they reached a studio room where Richard stood in jeans and a fitted sweater, hair slightly tousled, no longer the polished tycoon, but a man softened by something invisible and real. He smiled when he saw her, and in that moment the room felt safe, like maybe dreams weren't as far away as they once seemed. "You came," he said. Emily nodded, barely able to speak. "I almost didn't," she whispered. "I thought maybe you forgot." Richard shook his head gently, motioning to the setup, a simple microphone, a stool, and a guitar resting on its stand. "I haven't forgotten anything since I heard you sing." She stepped forward nervously, and as she sat, Richard picked up the guitar, his first time holding one in years, and strummed a soft chord, the vibration lingering like a ghost of who he used to be. "Is that the song?" he asked. Emily nodded, pulling out her lyrics and unfolding them with care. He looked over them slowly, the silence between them comfortable now, like old friends reuniting in a language only their hearts could understand. As he began playing, Emily closed her eyes and sang, not perfectly, not loudly, but honestly, and that was enough. Her voice danced through the room like it belonged there, every note carrying pain, hope, and the ache of someone who'd lived too much for her age. Richard watched her as he played, feeling tears press behind his eyes again, not just because of the song, but because her voice was pulling memories from him he'd buried deep beneath the foundation of boardrooms and bank accounts. His brother Michael had once written a song eerily similar to this when they were 17, before the accident that claimed his life and left Richard alone, guilt-ridden and hungry for distraction. After the song ended, the room sat in silence for a long moment, until Emily opened her eyes and saw Richard staring at the guitar, his fingers trembling slightly. "That was his guitar," he finally said, voice raw. "My brother's. I haven't played it in over a decade. Your song, it brought him back." Emily didn't fully understand, but she reached out and put her hand over his, grounding him in the present. "Maybe he sent me," she said softly. Richard laughed through his tears, the sound broken and beautiful. "Maybe he did." The recording engineer stepped out from behind the glass, wiping his eyes. That needs to be heard," he whispered, and Richard nodded, silently agreeing. But then, as Richard reviewed the playback, he noticed something that shook him to his core. The melody Emily had just sung, the key changes, the phrasing. It wasn't just similar to his brother's old song, it was identical. "Where did you hear that tune?" he asked quietly, trying not to alarm her. Emily tilted her head. "I don't know," she replied. "I just hear it sometimes in my dreams, ever since I was really little." Richard's breath caught, his heart stammering in his chest. "Did your mom ever play music?" he asked urgently. "Was she ever involved in the scene?" Emily nodded slowly. "Before she got sick, she told me she used to sing backup for some small bands in LA a long time ago. Said it never went anywhere." "Why?" But Richard didn't answer, not immediately, because in his hand he still held the sheet of lyrics Michael had written the night before he died, the only copy he'd kept all these years, tucked in his wallet like a secret he couldn't face. And now a little girl with blue eyes was singing it, perfectly. His world tilted. Was it coincidence? Fate? Holding the card tightly against her chest as if afraid it might vanish, and for the first time in months she ran, not from something, but toward something, toward hope, toward music, toward a stranger who, like her, had forgotten what it meant to be seen and had just begun to remember. The next afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the city skyline, Emily clutched Richard's business card like it was made of light, her heart racing with a strange mix of hope and terror. Her backpack slung across her small shoulders, filled not with school books, but her precious lyric sheet, a hairbrush, and a pair of old headphones she never dared plug into anything anymore because they reminded her of nights when her mother still danced in the kitchen. She walked through neighborhoods she'd never seen before, streets lined with palm trees and mansions behind iron gates, until she reached the address printed in golden letters on the card, True Sound Studios. The glass doors shimmered like magic, and as she stepped inside, the world seemed to hush around her. Clean white walls, framed platinum records, a grand piano glowing under warm lights, and the subtle scent of wood polish and fresh coffee lingering in the air. She didn't belong here, she thought, but before doubt could devour her, a receptionist greeted her warmly and said, "You must be Emily. Mr. Cole's been expecting you." Her eyes widened as she followed the woman down a hallway, every step echoing like a heartbeat, until they reached a studio room where Richard stood in jeans and a fitted sweater, hair slightly tousled, no longer the polished tycoon, but a man softened by something invisible and real. He smiled when he saw her, and in that moment the room felt safe, like maybe dreams weren't as far away as they once seemed. "You came," he said. Emily nodded, barely able to speak. "I almost didn't," she whispered. "I thought maybe you forgot." Richard shook his head gently, motioning to the setup, a simple microphone, a stool, and a guitar resting on its stand. "I haven't forgotten anything since I heard you sing." She stepped forward nervously, and as she sat, Richard picked up the guitar, his first time holding one in years, and strummed a soft chord, the vibration lingering like a ghost of who he used to be. "Is that the song?" he asked. Emily nodded, pulling out her lyrics and unfolding them with care. He looked over them slowly, the silence between them comfortable now, like old friends reuniting in a language only their hearts could understand. As he began playing, Emily closed her eyes and sang, not perfectly, not loudly, but honestly, and that was enough. Her voice danced through the room like it belonged there, every note carrying pain, hope, and the ache of someone who'd lived too much for her age. Richard watched her as he played, feeling tears press behind his eyes again, not just because of the song, but because her voice was pulling memories from him he'd buried deep beneath the foundation of boardrooms and bank accounts. His brother Michael had once written a song eerily similar to this when they were 17, before the accident that claimed his life and left Richard alone, guilt-ridden and hungry for distraction. After the song ended, the room sat in silence for a long moment, until Emily opened her eyes and saw Richard staring at the guitar, his fingers trembling slightly. "That was his guitar," he finally said, voice raw. "My brother's. I haven't played it in over a decade. Your song, it brought him back." Emily didn't fully understand, but she reached out and put her hand over his, grounding him in the present. "Maybe he sent me," she said softly. Richard laughed through his tears, the sound broken and beautiful. "Maybe he did." The recording engineer stepped out from behind the glass, wiping his eyes. That needs to be heard," he whispered, and Richard nodded, silently agreeing. But then, as Richard reviewed the playback, he noticed something that shook him to his core. The melody Emily had just sung, the key changes, the phrasing. It wasn't just similar to his brother's old song, it was identical. "Where did you hear that tune?" he asked quietly, trying not to alarm her. Emily tilted her head. "I don't know," she replied. "I just hear it sometimes in my dreams, ever since I was really little." Richard's breath caught, his heart stammering in his chest. "Did your mom ever play music?" he asked urgently. "Was she ever involved in the scene?" Emily nodded slowly. "Before she got sick, she told me she used to sing backup for some small bands in LA a long time ago. Said it never went anywhere." "Why?" But Richard didn't answer, not immediately, because in his hand he still held the sheet of lyrics Michael had written the night before he died, the only copy he'd kept all these years, tucked in his wallet like a secret he couldn't face. And now a little girl with blue eyes was singing it, perfectly. His world tilted. Was it coincidence? Fate? A long-forgotten connection? "What's your mum's name?" he finally asked, his voice no longer calm but urgent. Emily replied, "Claire. Claire Jennings." And in that moment, Richard felt the earth split beneath his feet. Claire Jennings was the girl Michael had loved, the one he wrote his final song for before the crash, the one who disappeared from Richard's life without explanation, leaving nothing but heartbreak behind. The room spun as realization dawned. Emily wasn't just some gifted girl from nowhere. She was Michael's daughter, his niece, flesh and blood. Richard stood frozen, staring at her with trembling lips, his mind screaming 1,000 thoughts at once, but all he could whisper was, "Oh my God." Emily looked up at him, confused, scared, unsure of what she'd just unearthed. "Mr. Cole, are you okay?" But he couldn't speak. Not yet. The past had just returned, not in echoes, but in the voice of a child who'd unknowingly carried his brother's song back into the world. Richard stood paralyzed, staring at Emily as if seeing her for the first time, his heart pounding like thunder beneath a fragile surface of composure. The recording studio suddenly felt too small, too loud, too alive with memories he had long since locked away, but now they came flooding back like a dam had broken. His brother's laughter, the final song they played together, the day he found Claire's letter torn in half beside Michael's guitar, and the funeral that felt like losing half his soul. Emily blinked up at him, still holding the lyrics in her delicate hands, the innocence in her eyes piercing him deeper than any loss ever had. "Mr. Cole?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "Did I do something wrong?" The words shattered him. "No, Emily," he whispered, kneeling in front of her, his breath shaking. "You did something right. You brought someone back to me I thought I'd never see again." She tilted her head, confused. "Who?" His voice faltered. "My brother, Michael. Your mother, Claire Jennings. She was his first love. He wrote that song for her. That melody, it's not just from your dreams, it's from him. He wrote it the night before he died." The air went still. Emily's small hands began to tremble as she processed the weight of what he was saying, her lips parting in disbelief. "You mean you knew my mum?" Richard nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I didn't just know her. I begged her to stay after Michael died. She disappeared after his funeral. I never saw her again." Emily's breathing grew faster. "So, you think—" Richard gently placed a hand over hers. "Emily, I think you're my niece." The room spun for her now, the floor dropping from beneath her feet. "But she never told me," she whispered. "She said my dad was someone she lost a long time ago, that it was too painful to talk about." Richard closed his eyes, every unanswered question now twisting into heartbreaking clarity. She must have been carrying both grief and guilt. Maybe she thought it was better to let you grow up away from the shadow of the past. But you weren't just some girl cleaning my car. "Emily, you're the last piece of my brother I have left." Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, her hands clenching the lyric sheet as if holding on to the truth itself. "Does that make you, my uncle?" she asked. Richard nodded, his eyes wet but steady. "It does, and I promise you I'll never let you go." Emily looked down at the card she still held, then back at the man before her, this billionaire who had seemed so unreachable hours ago, now suddenly just a man, broken and healing, same as her. "Why didn't we find each other sooner?" she whispered. "Because we both stopped singing," he said gently. "But fate has perfect pitch. It knows when it's time to bring the music back." Suddenly, the studio door opened, and the receptionist peeked in, holding a cell phone. "Mr. Cole," she said hesitantly. "There's a woman on the line, Claire Jennings. She says it's urgent." Emily's heart skipped a beat as she rushed forward, grabbing the phone with shaking hands. "Mom? Mom, it's me. Are you okay?" Richard watched her closely, feeling the world balance on the tip of that moment. Emily listened intently, then burst into tears. Yes, he's here. I'm safe." "Mum, why didn't you tell me about Michael?" There was a long pause, her eyes wide with emotion. "You were scared? I understand, but I met him, Mum, Uncle Richard, and I sang his song." Another pause. "He cried, Mum. He cried." Richard felt his throat tighten again. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. Emily nodded at something her mother said, then turned to him, whispering, "She wants to see you." Richard blinked. "Claire?" Emily handed him the phone. "Talk to her." His fingers curled around the device as if afraid it would disappear. "Claire?" he said, his voice cracking like old vinyl. There was silence, then a breath, then a whisper. "Richard, I'm sorry." That was all it took to crack the years between them. He could hear the tremble in her voice, the regret, the weight of everything unsaid. "You should have told me," he murmured. "She's mine too. She's his daughter." "I know," Claire choked. "I wanted to. I was just afraid of what the world would do to her. But she found you anyway, didn't she?" Richard looked at Emily, her cheeks wet with tears, her eyes glowing with relief and confusion, and something new, belonging. "Yes," he said. "She did, and she brought your voice back with her." Claire sobbed softly on the other end. "Promise me you'll take care of her." "You have my word," Richard said. "I won't let her go, not again." As the call ended, the studio engineer quietly walked in with the recording from earlier. "It's ready," he said. "Would you like to hear it?" Richard looked at Emily and nodded. She sat beside him as the playback began, the song flowing through the room like light returning to dark corners, her voice wrapped in his brother's chords, weaving the past and present into something brand new. As the final note rang out, Richard looked at her with eyes full of purpose. "You know what this means, don't you?" Emily looked up. "What?" He smiled, placing a hand over his heart. It's time the world heard your voice and his together. And as they sat there in the quiet that followed, the truth settled like dust after a storm. Two broken souls finding harmony again through a song neither of them could have sung alone. The next few days moved like a whirlwind through Emily's life, each moment brighter and scarier than the one before. As if the universe had suddenly spun her from the shadows of silence into the heart of a spotlight she wasn't sure she was ready for. She spent her afternoons at True Sound Studios recording not just her original song, but fragments of others she'd written in secret. Melodies scrawled in old notebooks with broken pencils by the flicker of candlelight when the power had gone out at home. Richard never left her side, not once. He was no longer just a billionaire or her long-lost uncle, but something she never thought she'd have. Someone who believed in her with his full heart, without conditions. They shared stories between takes, her about the nights her mum coughed herself to sleep, him about the summer he and Michael wrote songs barefoot in the garage with soda bottles and starry dreams. And with each note she sang, Richard saw more of his brother flickering behind her eyes, not in her appearance, but in the fierce honesty, the raw ache in her voice, the way she poured everything into each line, like it was the only thing keeping her soul from breaking. Then, just when she was starting to feel safe, Richard surprised her with something so terrifying it made her blood run cold. "There's a benefit concert this Saturday," he said softly, standing beside her in the studio with a gentle but determined look in his eyes. "It's a small theatre, local charity, only a few hundred people. I want you to sing your song, Live." Emily's eyes widened, her throat drying instantly. "Live," she whispered. "Like, in front of people?" Richard nodded. "You're ready?" But Emily shook her head. No, I can't. I've never even stood on a real stage before. What if I mess up? What if they laugh? What if I freeze?" Richard stepped closer, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "What if you don't?" he said. "What if you show them the truth that only you can sing?" She looked at the floor, heart pounding in her ears. "What if I disappoint you?" Richard knelt so he was eye level with her. "Emily, you've already changed my life. You reminded me of what it means to feel. You can't disappoint me." The words settled over her like armor, not to shield her from fear, but to remind her she wasn't alone in it. And so, trembling but determined, Emily agreed. The night of the concert arrived like a tidal wave. Richard, in the front row of the elegant little theatre, Claire watching via live stream from her hospital bed, the crowd buzzing with polite curiosity as the MC announced a special new talent no one had heard of yet. Behind the curtain, Emily stood in a soft navy dress Richard had bought her, hands sweating, knees shaking, the sound of her heartbeat louder than the applause beyond the curtain. "You can do this," Richard had told her before she walked on stage. "Not for them, for you." The spotlight hit her like a punch, and for a breathless moment all she saw was darkness, rows of blurry faces, stage lights too bright, her palms slick with nerves. Then she remembered her mother's voice. "Sing like nobody's watching, even when everyone is." And she did. She took a breath and sang. The first note trembled, soft as a whisper, but the second carried weight, and the third cracked open the room like lightning across silence. People stopped shifting in their seats. Conversations died. Phones were lowered. Her voice, fragile yet full, wrapped around the room like a ribbon of pain and hope, lifting the audience into a space where everything else fell away. By the time she reached the chorus, something unexplainable had happened. Grown adults were crying, strangers were holding hands, and Richard sat motionless with tears streaking his cheeks, clutching his brother's guitar pick in one hand and Emily's lyric sheet in the other. As she sang the final note, her voice faltered slightly, not from fear, but from feeling, and then silence fell across the theatre like snow. For a second, no one moved, And then, like a wave, applause exploded, rising, clapping, whistling, crying, a thunder of love and awe that swallowed Emily whole. She stood frozen in place, eyes wide, heart racing. And then, as she looked into the crowd and saw Richard rise to his feet, clapping with a look that said, "I've never been prouder in my life," she smiled through her tears. The MC returned to the stage, wrapping an arm around her and announcing that all proceeds from tonight's event would go toward a special fund set up in Michael Cole's name for underprivileged youth with musical dreams. The theatre erupted again. Emily stepped back from the mic and walked into the wings, breathless, where Richard was waiting with open arms. She collapsed into him, and he held her tight. "You did it," he whispered. "You didn't just sing, you soared." Emily pulled back, eyes still glistening. "I felt like I wasn't alone up there," she said. "You weren't," Richard replied, his voice breaking. "Michael was with you, and now the world is too." The night after Emily's breathtaking performance felt like something out of a dream she was afraid to wake from. Texts and calls poured into the studio from agents, producers, and journalists who wanted to know who the angelic girl was who sang like she carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories in her lungs. But while the world buzzed in awe, Emily sat curled up in the back of Richard's car, staring out the window, overwhelmed, exhausted, and still trying to believe that the sound of applause hadn't just been her imagination. Beside her, Richard watched in silence, his heart full yet aching, because while the world saw a star rising, he saw a little girl who had just poured every shard of her soul into the air, and now needed peace. As they pulled into the quiet apartment building where Claire lived, Emily sat up straight, nerves firing again, her fingers twisting in her lap. "Do you think she'll be mad?" she whispered. "That I sang the song? That I found you?" Richard shook his head gently, his voice calm. "No, sweetheart. I think she's been waiting for this moment longer than either of us." They climbed the creaking stairwell, past chipped paint and the soft sound of someone watching television behind a thin wall, until they reached a worn door with the number 2B barely hanging on. Emily knocked softly, her breath catching in her throat. The door opened slowly, and there stood Claire, thin, pale, with tired eyes that lit up like fireflies the moment she saw her daughter. "Emily," she breathed, pulling her into a trembling hug. For a long moment, nothing else existed. Just mother and daughter, wrapped in the kind of embrace that only years of quiet pain and stubborn love could create. Then Claire looked up at Richard. Her eyes widened and her breath hitched. "It's really you," she whispered. He nodded, stepping forward, emotions storming behind his gaze. "Claire," he said softly, "you disappeared. I looked for you." For years, Claire's face crumpled as tears welled up. "I was scared, Richard. After Michael died, I didn't know how to breathe. And when I found out I was pregnant, I just couldn't face anyone. I didn't think I could carry his memory without breaking." Richard nodded, slowly swallowing hard. "But you did. You carried it, in her, every day. And she brought him back to me." Claire sank into the couch, clutching her chest. "She sings like him. Did you hear it?" Richard smiled through his tears. "I didn't just hear it. I felt it." Emily sat between them now, her small hands in theirs, as if bridging the past and present with the simple act of belonging. Claire looked down, ashamed. "I should have told her sooner. I should have told you sooner." Richard leaned in. "It's not too late. We still have time, all three of us." For a long moment, the room sat in quiet forgiveness, each of them letting go of years of grief that had wrapped around their hearts like vines. "He loved you, you know," Richard said softly. "He talked about marrying you, building a life." Claire nodded slowly. "I loved him too. That song she sang. It was the one he played for me the night before he died. I thought it was gone forever." Emily watched their exchange, her eyes wide and watery. "It wasn't gone," she said. "It was just waiting." And then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small recorder Richard had given her to keep track of her song ideas. "There's something else," she said, pressing play. A second, softer melody played, a lullaby she'd written for her mother, filled with hope, forgiveness, and the aching kind of love that only children feel for the ones who've fought battles behind closed doors. Claire listened, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "You wrote this?" she asked. Emily nodded. "For you?" Claire covered her mouth, breaking into sobs as she reached for her daughter. "You're the best thing I ever did. I'm so proud of you, Emily." Richard stood and moved to the window, wiping his eyes. Outside, the city buzzed in neon and noise, unaware of the quiet reunion happening in a tiny, second-floor apartment where healing had finally come home. "There's something else," he said gently. "I want to help you, Claire. You shouldn't be living like this. I have the means. Let me take care of both of you." Claire opened her mouth to protest, but Richard raised a hand. "Not out of guilt, not charity, family." Claire nodded slowly, the weight of independence softening under the warmth of acceptance. That night, they ordered Chinese takeout and sat on the floor, laughing at old memories, sharing pictures, and telling stories that had been trapped in silence for too long. Emily curled up beside her mother, her head on her lap, as Richard quietly strummed Michael's guitar in the corner, letting its voice fill the room again. For the first time in over a decade, there was harmony between the living, the lost, and the love that never truly left. And as the night deepened, three broken hearts found something that felt like music again. Not a song for the world this time, but a melody made just for them. A melody reunited. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Emily had ever imagined. Her performance from the charity concert went viral, racking up millions of views as strangers across the world messaged Richard's team, asking, "Who is this girl with a voice that sounds like hope itself?" Yet through the whirlwind of attention, studio offers, and TV invitations, Emily stayed grounded, rooted not in fame, but in the warmth of the love she had finally found, an uncle who never let go of her hand, and a mother who now laughed more than she coughed. Richard shielded her fiercely from exploitation, turning down seven-figure offers that wanted to turn her into a pop product, not a person. "She's not for sale," he told one producer. "She's a legacy." One morning, while walking past the old car wash where their story began, Emily paused, staring at the rusted bay and the exact spot where she first sang her heart out while scrubbing his car. "Can we do something?" she asked Richard. "Something that matters?" He smiled and nodded, already knowing what she meant. Within months, they converted the abandoned car wash into a vibrant music outreach center called the Michael Cole Foundation, a place where kids from hard places could come and find their voice. The old bays were now sound booths, the office now a recording studio, the cracked pavement now a courtyard where children danced and sang freely. Emily taught songwriting classes in the afternoons, using her own story as proof that music can find you even when you think the world's forgotten your name. Richard managed the finances but insisted on being called Uncle Rich by every kid who walked through the door, always present with a guitar in hand and open ears. Claire, slowly regaining strength, volunteered as a mentor to the girls, teaching them how to turn their struggles into strength. On the one-year anniversary of Emily's first performance, they held a public concert in the park with a makeshift stage and hundreds of families gathered in lawn chairs under the stars. Before stepping up to the mic, Emily looked at the crowd, then at Richard, who stood at the edge of the stage with glistening eyes. "This song," she began, her voice steady and strong, "isn't just mine. It's my mum's, it's my uncle's, it's my father's. It's for anyone who's ever felt invisible until someone truly listened." And then she sang. A new song she had written just weeks earlier, a stunning ballad called "Somewhere in the Silence." The lyrics spoke of broken homes, quiet dreams, and the beauty of being heard even when your voice shakes. By the second chorus, the crowd was silent, many crying, others holding hands. Behind her, a slideshow played, photos of Michael, Claire, young Richard, and even Emily scrubbing that black sports car, frozen in time before fate rewrote their story. As the final note hung in the night air like a prayer, the crowd erupted, not just in applause, but in connection. People didn't just hear a voice, they felt a message that love isn't lost, it's waiting, sometimes in silence, sometimes in song. That night, Richard wrapped Emily in a hug as tears fell freely down his cheeks. "He'd be so proud of you," he whispered. "No," Emily replied, clutching his hand tightly. "He'd be proud of us." And from that moment forward, their lives were no longer defined by loss, but by what they'd built from it. The media eventually moved on, but the music never stopped. Not in the studio, not in the foundation, and not in their hearts. Emily went on to release her first album titled Songs My Father Never Heard, donating every dollar to help children find healing through music. And Richard, the millionaire who once cried in silence, now cried openly in front of crowds, always smiling through his tears, proud to be the man who found family not through bloodlines or contracts, but through a song. The story that began with a sponge, a dusty car, and a melody sung under the sun had become a symphony of second chances, and as Emily stood each night under the stage lights, she knew one thing for certain. Sometimes one voice in the right moment doesn't just change a life, it echoes across the world.